Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura Bee Floss 2. Welcome or welcome back. I'm so glad you joined me today. We are continuing our Bee Happy Quilt sew along. We are on week 12. I'm so happy how this quilt is coming together. I am really being happy lately because this week we are going to be working on the flower box, which goes down here that you can't really see, and the beehive that goes over here. So once we get this beehive done, we can put this little section over here for row 4 together, and then we only have the one flower next week to do to complete row 4. That's going to be so exciting. So this week, let me put up on the screen, these are the blocks we're going to be completing, the beehive and the flower box. There are quite a few pieces, but we can manage them. It's not that big of a deal. We also have some of those daisies to turn out. I already have mine turned out, and hopefully you caught the video from a few weeks ago where I shared the Turn It On tool tip and just how to get those daisies turned out quickly. If not, I'll put a link in the description box below, or you can just check out my videos on the channel and find the one that talks about how to turn those applique shapes out easily. So that's where we're at this week, and I'm going to go ahead and put up a list of supplies. There are quite a few things to gather on that too. We're only making 2 blocks, but both of them have flowers in them, so we also have leaves. So we have lots of little shapes to turn out this week. In addition to the applique shapes that we're turning out this week, you also have some bias tape. I once again lucked out and had some bias tape left over from previous projects in my stash, so I grabbed those along. The one thing I want to point out to you about these blocks is that the beehive door, you want to check Lori's blog because she has you trim that off after you turn the shape. I don't know why we didn't trim it off before we did the shape, but we didn't. So just go check that out and cut down your beehive door so you have that at the right height. So without further ado, we're heading over to the ironing board to press out our shapes and lay out our blocks. The first block we're going to work on is that flower box. So I just have my background fabric. I have ironed it in half vertically. So when I open it up, I have that nice little line. I know that's where the center of my block should be. Now remember, I do cut my backgrounds a little bigger than they need to be just because I like to be able to trim them down. Now this block finishes at 10 by 12, so I want to make sure that I don't get my flowers so tall that they will end up in a seam allowance. That would not be a good way to go. All right, so I'm just going to get my glue going here and kind of think about how I want this block laid out. And I would like to have probably about 3/4 of an inch above and below where everything stops. So I'm going to go ahead and scooch this little guy down because that is way too high where it's at. Now I did press this shape in half, which hopefully you saw, and that way I know that it is exactly on the center of the block. All right, so I am going to glue the bottom part of this block, of the box down. Not the top because I want to be able to lift it to get my stems in there. And I'm going to be using this darker green bias tape for that. Now we have 3 flowers and they all go perfectly straight. No one is curving in this block. The flower in the middle is a tulip and it is the tallest. So I'm just going to set this up here and kind of give it a good measure. I'm sure I probably don't need my stem quite that long, but that's how long I'm going to make it for now. Get the pieces of my tulip. Now you can fold your tulip base in half and give it a good little crease, and then you know it is perfectly aligned on the center of your block as well. That's one little tip for you. And I think that will work really well. This is a 12-inch ruler. My block will be 12.5. And that will give me another 1/4 inch up here. Yeah, I might scoot it down just a little. All right, so I'm going to glue the top of this flower. And then I'm also going to go ahead and glue the middle of the tulip, but I'm only going to glue it in the middle of this flower, not to the edge, because remember when I'm appliquing, I want to be able to lift up those points and get underneath. Now I'm just going to run some glue down this center folded line that I have. Start my stem, run it right down that line. And then because I did not glue the top of this box, I can pull it back. I can put another little dot of glue and hide that stem. Now, I want to do some measuring because I want my flowers to be perfectly spaced. So this box is 6.5, but I'm actually going to make it 7 with the cute little trim that's going to go on top of here. So 3.5 will be the center, and I just want to make sure that these flowers are spaced the same on both sides. So I'm going to go 2 inches over both directions. Oh, that just about worked out perfectly, didn't it? Now you can put these flowers at the exact same height, or you can put them at varying heights. That is up to you. This is where you can do a little personalization and just have some fun. All right, so I know that stem is going to go there. Another little tip for you, to get that stem straight, I am going to run this along the side of my box, and I'm going to leave it right there. Now I can move my stem away, and I can run a little glue right down beside it. Now that stem will be perfectly straight. Again, I can lift back the top of this box, put a dot of glue to secure the other end. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. And again, I'm just picking a mark on my ruler that I can run. And then just putting a little glue right down beside my ruler. And there we have our stems. Now, I'm going to try to get my flowers at the same height. And I know that sometimes I don't do that and sometimes I do. And you just never know what to expect from me. But this time I'm going to. Now, I turn these flowers out with the Turn It All tool. If you haven't seen that video, make sure you check it out. Made it so easy. All right, so I'm just going to put few dots of glue under some petals, but not around that stem, because I want to be able to lift the flower up to get underneath there to do some applique. So the top 3 petals will have a little glue, but those bottom 2 will not. Now I'm going to measure this, and it is right at 6 3/4 inch. So now I know that I can lay it over here, 6 3/4 inch, and that's where that top petal needs to go. And measure that again. I think I got even a little high. I did. That's okay. You can scooch down. All right, now I need to put these little center dots. I'm going to just glue them right in the very center of this flower. And the reason I want to do it like that is because then I can lift up these little center circles as I walk around, as I applique around the petals. All right, now the only thing we have left are leaves. And again, I'm going to try to get those at the same height. And we're going to go 1 1/4, I believe. I'm going to let them kind of lay on their side just to kind of fill in some of that blank space. All right, now the last thing I have to do is put this trim on the top of the box. Now, the trim you were supposed to have for this box was 3/4 of an inch. Well, I didn't have any of that, so I cheated, and I have a 1/4 inch and a 1/2 inch bias tape. They're 2 different colors, but I think it's going to be really cool and interesting. So I'm just going to glue them under and glue them on, and it's going to be awesome. For this, I'm going to line up my ruler on the box because I want this to stick out a 1/4 inch from both sides. So I need to make sure that I have them the right length. And this brown one, I'm going to run glue, but not all the way to the edge, along the top of my ruler, lining up the end of the bias tape on my ruler so I know it's in the right spot. And you'll notice I left a little bit of the purple up here because I'm also going to glue the blue to the purple but not the background, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to applique my stems down behind that. All right, so now I have a double bias tape top for my box, and it will be glued into place, but I will still be able to lift it to applique the box and the stems behind. The other block we're doing this week is the Beehive block. So I'm going to iron my background fabric again in half vertically, so I know where that center line is. Now this one, I'm actually going to turn it around this way. This one is a little different because the beehive actually goes into the seam allowance. So it needs to be the bottom of the block. However, I cut my block, my background, a little bigger than it needed to be. So I am still just going to position it basically towards the bottom, but not right at the edge, because I don't know for certain that this is perfectly straight. Now there are 2 flowers for this block, and their stems are curved. So we want to make sure that we do not go a wider than we should with this block. So if I put this on either side of the hive, I have about 3/4 of an inch. So that means that these flowers cannot go out any more than 3/4 of an inch. So let me see here. Now these flower stems are curved out a little bit, not a ton, but a little. You can do this a couple different ways. I really feel like you could probably curve it without having to iron it if you just run your glue line. But if you feel like you need to iron this to get that curve in there, then all you do is you just take the bias tape and you hold it down, and then you just start working it around to iron it. But again, I don't really feel like that is truly necessary. But again, if you feel like it is, please do it. Sometimes I feel like it's easier to place the flower first and then take the stem to it, because now all I gotta do is just take my glue and run it down, and then I'll take the stem. And remember, since you're cutting off the end of this block, the stem goes into the seam allowance as well. So all you have to do is run your stem down. You don't have to turn either of the ends under, because one end goes under the flower and one end goes into the seam allowance. So there's no ends on these stems to turn under. Now when I'm appliquing this down, I will take my stiletto, or you could use the purple thing or something like that, and push that interfacing that's sticking out around the flower petals. I'll push that under so you can't see it. And again, since that stem is going into the seam allowance, it doesn't necessarily have to be straight down there either. It can just be cut off at will. As long as it's going to be longer than, you know, where your seam is going to be, you're fine. All right, so we're at the sewing machine. For those of you who haven't seen my videos before, I'm using a Juki DX7. We are just going to start appliquing all of our shapes down. I use a zigzag stitch. I crank my width down to 1.8, my length to 0.9. I'm using just a dual duty polyester thread, nothing fancy there. And I'm just going to start appliquing on the stems first. If you've seen my previous videos, you know that I applique bottom to top. So anything that's behind something gets done first. Okay, so when you're doing these daisies, think about a couple things. I definitely have some interfacing poking out down here, and I could take my purple thing and kind of push that under, and that would be perfectly fine. But look at this. When I put that red circle down, you're not even going to see it. So I'm not going to sweat about that too much, and that also tells me that I could start in that little concave area with my zigzag and not have to do a stay stitch, because it's going to be stitched over with that red center. Now, just like when we were sewing these daisies originally to the interfacing, you just want to take your time with them. There's lots of little tight curves, and you just want to take your time and go with the speed that is best for you. Now remember how we did not glue our bias tape all the way to the edge? This is why. We can get right underneath there and start our applique, and we'll be able to end on the other side with the same procedure. There are definitely a lot of different colors in these two little blocks. Not as bad as the bunting block, but whew, several colors. I know I had mentioned earlier on in the series that I have done quilts like this where I don't switch colors. I just outline everything, applique everything with like a dark brown or a black. You could do white too for that matter, or any color that you wanted, honestly. Which that would definitely save you a little time if you're trying to figure out ways to save time when you're machine appliquing. Just not having to switch your colors out would be one thing that you could do. It's still... Alright, so all the applique is completed, and now I'm just going to put together a few blocks in row 4, just because I want to be able to put them together as I go along. So I know that this little bee and bird... Oh. Okay, so I could tell you, oh look, I customized my quilt, or I could say, look, here's a variation that I thought of, or I could say, hey, guess what I did? I put the orientation for the beehive block the wrong way. And when I went to sew it together with the little bee and bird, that's when I realized that it was the wrong height. That's fun. So I had to come up with a plan to disguise my oops, and I'm just adding a flower. Trace the interface, trace the Sew Simple shapes, sewed the pieces, turned them out, got them glued down, and I'm going to applique them on. Then we're going to sew some blocks together. All right, so the bee and bird go to the left of the hive. My hive is a little shorter than anticipated, but you know, it's okay. Times are tough, so you gotta, you know, cut corners where you can and The bees apparently weren't able to pay for the whole hive this year. I think many of us can relate to that. But they're happy with what they have, and they're very thankful for the extra flour. For anyone that's interested, what I did to fix my boo-boo was I sewed an extra 2-inch piece of the background fabric over here to the left side of the block and then added in this extra little flower. We'll talk about that more over the design wall. All right, so week 12 was fun for me. How about you? So I just want to let you know this is how much we have done in our quilt. In case you haven't been laying your blocks out or sewing them together like I have, this is where we're at. We only have like 5 blocks left to do, and 3 of those are going to be done next week. So next week we're going to be working on the coral flowers, the pin cushion, and a 3 trees block. So they will have some pieces to them obviously, but we'll get through it together. This week we've completed our beehive block. I bet some of you even put the right orientation on your beehive. I did. It's okay. So as I was discussing over the sewing machine, what I ended up doing was I just sewed an extra little 2-inch strip on this side of the block and added another flower over here. So that way it will get my block to the right size. And I also had to cut off 2 inches off the bottom of that hive. So my hive doesn't have a door anymore. And the heart is, you know, pretty close down to the bottom, but it's okay. I'm fine with it, and I'm going to just leave it the way it is. The other block we did this week was the flower box. And here are our 3 flowers, our tulips and our 2 daisies and our cute little flower box. The modification I made on this one purposefully was the 2 types of bias tape here at the top to make that 3/4 inch instead of trying to find some in my stash or make some up. So those are our blocks for the week. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial for the Bee Happy Quilt Sew Along. I really do hope that you have learned through my mistakes that sometimes you just have to transition. You just have to figure it out. You have to figure out a way to make it work and just move on with your life, right? So I think this block is darling, and no one will know unless they see the original design of the quilt or you tell them. So let's just keep that between us, okay? All right, until next time, I hope you're finding joy in all you do. Carve out some time for crafting and creating, and make sure it's always happy stitching.